Let's talk about food standards. Food standards, again, they can be part of your food laws and regulation, and they also establish a lot of criteria for food safety and food quality. They can be part of regulation, as I earlier said. For example, if we have a standard of identity that has been written in this US CFR Title 21, uh, it can be called as a standard. And as I said, that there may be standards, for example, such as Codex Standards. They are the best example of standards because these standards are not mandatory, and it is not mandatory that every standard must be followed. But once a standard is there in your regulation, in your country's regulation, then they must be followed. So the Codex Alimentarius guidelines or the standards are general guidelines that has to be uh, that can be adopted. Rather, I would not say that has to be adopted, but they can be adopted by different countries because they would be setting up standards for safety and quality of food product, and it is their mandate to actually implement those standards that are developed by FAO and WHO uh, in their food safety programs. So it is a collection of standards. As I said, it includes all the criteria for food quality, food suitability, and food safety. These are, again, I would say, these are general guidelines. They are available online for every kind of food, and they are very much detailed. And most of the countries would pick up those standards and they would follow it. And once they follow it, it would be mandatory for that country producer to follow those guidelines. But itself, by default, these Codex Alimentarius are not they are not the mandatory standards for every country to be followed. So they have been adopted by many countries, and why they have been adopted by many countries is for the reason that they help in the smooth trade or within different countries. Because if they have similar standards, that would be actually helpful in order to have fair trade practices, as well as the food goods moving from one country to another country smoothly without having any problem. Because if there are different standards for one food product, that might uh, mean that you might have different variation in those standards, and those standards can lead to differences for which may not be helpful for having food which is easily that can cross borders from one country to another. It can include codes of practices such as Codex General Principles of Food Hygiene Standard for maximum residue level and pesticides and veterinary drugs. So they can be different codes, as I said, codes for hygiene or codes for maximum residue level for veterinary drugs or pesticides or other harmful ingredients. So they might be added, and they are normally based on a lot of research that has been done in many countries, so they would be setting up those standards. They also have standards for additives and the level at which different additives can be added. So, as I earlier said, that these are the general standards, they are general guidelines, they can be followed by different countries, and they are followed by different countries depending upon if the countries want to adopt these standards or not. It is also possible, and in our country, in Pakistan, we also see that the provincial regulatory authorities, they have got their own set standards. They may be taken up some from the Codex standards, and they might have their own standards based on the local need. Then they must be followed as a law by the all the food manufacturing people within the country. So this was a little detail about food standards.